Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. Tonight we bring some true horror stories of the national parks. So enjoy, but don't forget to like, share and subscribe. This is why national park rangers are afraid of the deep woods. California's Yosemite National Park is consistently ranked as one of the most impressive and best attended national parks in all of America, according to some. However, it has an equal reputation as one of the most vile and dangerous for visitors. This assertion was reinforced when in March 2017, the National Park Service released a list of all of Yosemite's unsolved missing persons cases. This disclosure, which may or may not have been complete, marked the first time that any such document had been made public by the National Park Service, chronicling more than 30 disappearances stretching all the way back to 1909, when en route to Sentinel Dome Shepard had disappeared into. Yosemite's wilderness, granted many of these disappearances, might be entirely mundane, but our national parks contain countless dangers from environmental disasters to inclement weather and wildlife attacks. At the same time, reports of grisly murders, strange creatures and other things that go bump in the night just won't go away. No matter how hard authorities try to dismiss such crazy claims, many of us come to these second-hand. Some unlucky campers come face to face with the unknown in places like Yosemite National Park. One of the more infamous stories of Yosemite is the Flannel Man. The area is now known as Yosemite National Park, and it has been inhabited for almost 4 millennia, with suggestions that indigenous visitation may have first occurred twice as long ago or even earlier. The person largely responsible for bringing Yosemite to the attention of European settlers was mountaineer James D. Savage, who in 1851, his arrival brought with it the name we use today. Savage popularized the term Yosemite, using what he believed was a Miwok word meaning grizzly bear. This is the story you'll most often hear today, but it is actually a misconception as noted by Carlton Smith in his book Murder in Yosemite. The word, while similar to the Miwok term for grizzly bear, is actually better translated as killer. Historians today suspect that the Miwok were referring to Yosemite's Awatani Cheek people. However, there exists some indication that the term Yosemite referred to a race of shadowy beings, or people who antagonized other tribes in the valley. Their actual identity remains unknown. The Mi-Wake-Io-Hamiti was used to describe these elusive enemies, and is best translated as meaning. Some among them are killers who were these mysterious adversaries. And do they still harass visitors in Yosemite National Park today? Perhaps the tribes were referring to how spirits of the dead and other terrifying apparitions seem especially fond of Yosemite Valley, clinging to the mountains and forced long after death. Allegedly, one of the more unsettling places for campers to stay in Yosemite National Park is Camp No. 6. According to an urban legend, sometime in the past, a camper had hung himself on his tent's wooden frame. No one seems to know why the camper took his own life, but ever since then, visitors to Camp No. 6 report all sorts of bizarre paranormal phenomena, including the sight of the man swaying in the cold evening breeze from the wooden frame between 11 at night and 3 in the morning, while the hung man of Camp No. 6 doesn't seem to make any noise. Another spectre from Yosemite National Park, it seems much more vocal. Around 2015, several families attended Yosemite over spring break. All their children were around the same age, between 15 and 17, including the primary witness, we'll call her Elizabeth, and her friend Christine, as any teenagers might. The children found their parents' plan for rest and relaxation more tedious and boring, and decided to pass the time exploring. 2 of the other kids, both boys, were obsessed with rock climbing, and while they had plenty of gear, they weren't very skilled. Nonetheless, their enthusiasm was contagious, and soon all 7 youngsters found themselves wandering just off the trail to a boulder field, which included a tall pile of granite. The damp weather of the day made for treacherous footing, but all of the teens exercised caution as they clambered among the rocks, and after nearly 20 minutes of exploration, they found themselves at the base of an enormous stone wall. One of Yosemite's many mountains, just 20 feet above them, set a rock shelf. The view from there would be tremendous, they thought, for the climbers, decided the scene would be worth the effort to reach it, so they began travelling along the rock wall looking for a way up. They succeeded after a bit of effort, catching a glimpse of Yosemite's famous half-dome and its tree line. Along the way, it was a magnificent spot, the perfect place for a crew of bored teenagers to hang out this precipice, and the stone wall below would serve as their meeting place for the remainder of the week. It was isolated, but not dangerously so, and just far enough away from the prying eyes of parents or any trails that might bring hikers their way. As their second day at the stone wall came to a close, Elizabeth decided it was time to return to camp. She was hungry, and her parents, who were originally from South Africa, were making a delicious stew from their home country that she really enjoyed. As she and the others began their descent back to the trail, Elizabeth heard her friend's name being called, Christine, and since they had told their parents about their hiding place, the teens just thought little of this voice. It was likely Christine's dad, after all, coming within earshot to call his daughter back for dinner time. They all shouted back that they were on their way, heading off in the direction of the voice when they reached the spot where they thought Christine's father had been calling them. However, nobody was there to greet them. Still, no one suspected really anything out of the ordinary. Perhaps he had simply gone back to camp. The teenagers soon found themselves back at dinner, where nobody bothered to mention the voice in the forest. After all, one of their parents had to have been the one calling them. Right, the following day, the teens returned to the stone wall once more, and as they reached the boulder field, Jared, one of the boys, said something just barely loud enough for the group to hear it. Guys keep looking forward. Anxiety then quickly spread to the group like chain lightning. What do you see? Christine had asked the bear, but Jer looked at her by the way of an answer and said, How far are we from the trail? Christine had shrugged and replied, I don't know. 100 yards, in other words, far enough that nobody should have simply stumbled upon them. It's considered unwise for anyone but the most seasoned hiker to stray away from any trail, a rule that teens had already broken several days earlier. Now, the very solitude that had made the stone wall in the boulder field so appealing now seemed ominous. Jad had gestured for everybody to huddle together. As they did so, Elizabeth began looking around, trying to just see what was going on and what had alarmed her friend. Within moments, she spotted a figure no more than 50 feet away, looking in their direction. It was a man with a slender build, wearing a flannel shirt and holding a flashlight. He had a beard, and the hair on his head was bound up in dreadlocks. He was staring directly at the teens completely. Still, everybody else must have spotted the man, because the group bolted back towards the trail away from the boulder field as fast as they could. As they stumbled downhill, they heard the voice behind them calling Christine, but by the time they reached their camp, their children were already hysterical. They told their parents the entire story, prompting them to switch campsites. The parents also informed the rangers about the strange man, but nobody had seen anyone in the vicinity that matched these strangers' description. So who was this person? How did he know Christine's name? Although it's easy to assume it was a flesh-and-blood human being who had creepily been following and eavesdropping on them. A tantalizing clue lies in his attire, a flannel shirt. As early as 1970, paranormal author John Keel noted the propensity for all sorts of ghostly apparitions to appear in checkered shirts. These spectres often appear in witnesses' bedrooms in the middle of the night, only to vanish as soon as the light is flicked on. Occult literature is filled with references to ghosts storing checkered shirts, but the occultists tend to skip over this seemingly irrelevant detail. Keel had wrote this in Strange Creatures from Time and Space. The man in the checkered shirt seems to be just another variation on a phenomenon. Well known to those who delve into the psychic and occult world, bizarre bedroom phantoms are commonplace everywhere in the world. In the years since, author Timothy Renner has begun collecting reports of what he has dubbed the Flannel Man, which he shares on his podcast, Strange Familiars. Renner has amassed an enormous number of reports where strange men in checkered shirts, often bearded like Elizabeth's stranger, appear in places they should, not only to disappear in plain sight, often accompanied by other paranormal and strange phenomena. And on the topic of paranormal, in August of 2017, a man visiting Yosemite National Park with two friends, Zach and Andrew, bumped into something far stranger than a man in flannel. Zach had been working for the park at Glacier Point, and his friends had decided to pay him a visit. One particular beautiful evening, the three friends decided it would be fun to watch the sunset near Chilnewell Falls, even though they'd be returning home. The 4-mile 2,000 aft hike in the dark. Zach knew the area quite well. so they had nothing to fear. Their plan was to bring dinner to the top, swim in the pools, and wait for Mother Nature's show to begin. The trip got off to a rocky start. However, near the end of their ascent, the friends met another man who had frantically told him that his hiking companion had slipped, fallen 50 ft and likely shattered his femur. While neither of the hikers had cell phone reception, the friends did so. They dialed 911 to assist Zach, who had seen many such accidents during his tenure at Yosemite, assured both men that help was on its way. Authorities would be dispatching a helicopter for medical evacuation since they had confirmed the victim's location with search and rescue. The three friends saw no reason to spoil their outing and continued the evening's plans they were able to take in not only the breathtaking sunset, but the chopper as well descending to rescue the fallen man. And once the sun had finally dipped behind the trees, the friends began their own descent, thanking medical personnel for their assistance as they passed by the accident site. Despite the heavy number of people present on the trail above it, was pitch black further down the path, and the moon offered little help for lighting their way. The three friends switched on their phones, using them as flashlights to find their footing, lest they need medical attention themselves. After walking about a mile downhill, the trail became a series of zigzagging switchbacks between a sharp incline to the right and a steep drop-off to their left. Zach was in front, Andrew behind, and the primary witness was in the middle when they caught something poking out from behind a tree. It was only about 15 feet away on the inclined side of the path. Zach had shined his light in the shape's direction, only to have whatever it was launched itself from behind the tree across the other side of the trail downhill. They all later described it as clearly being a humanoid. It ran on 2 FT, but didn't seem to be wearing any clothing, and certainly didn't move like any person they had ever seen. The friends stopped dead in their tracks, terrified that another 3 miles of trail lay before them. Once they gathered themselves, they shined their lights down the opposite side of the trail, but couldn't make out anything out of the ordinary. Where had the thing gone? The mountainside was far too steep for any hiker in their right mind to have attempted a descent. The friends would never learn exactly what they saw in Yosemite National Park that night. The primary witness later speculated that it could have been a skinwalker or some other Native American spirit, perhaps hoping to make an easy meal of the wounded hiker further up the mountain. While such encounters are unsettling, at least no one was physically harmed by the beast. The same cannot be said for other campers. Those overnighting in Yosemite National Park sometimes report something nipping at their heads while they sleep. One Mr. J. Jeffrey Stanton from Walnut Creek, California, reported that he had been camping in the Wawona campground when he was awoken by a sharp pain in his head. He opened his eyes just in time to see a canine form trotting off into the bushes. The wound was severe enough to necessitate first aid as well as a visit to Lewis Memorial Hospital, where he was administered precautionary rabies treatments. While this could certainly be attributed to a coyote, a thorough search of the area failed to turn up the culprit after a week's worth of effort. Was this just a rogue animal or something more sinister? Recall that a variety of indigenous black magic practitioners, including skinwalkers, find close association with wolves and coyotes. A month later, a nearly identical scenario had unfolded again at Wawona campground. Carl M. Munson, like Stanton, found himself awoken by a scratch on his head. Again, park rangers mustered a search of the area while again abandoned after several days of finding nothing. The official explanation, admittedly most likely, is that of a coyote, or wild dog was stalking nearby when Munson shifted in his sleep bag, triggering the animal's predatory reflexes. What if the headbiter had been allowed to finish its task? What would have happened? A chilling tale from a seasoned outdoorsman may shed some light on the headbiter's victims. You see, it was summer of 1998. The witness was employed by Yosemite National Park's Backcountry Division, one of only 15 such personnel charged with educating the public about Yosemite's less accessible areas. 90s of Yosemite is designated as wilderness, meaning that while recreational activities like camping, hiking, climbing, and skiing are permitted, there is no infrastructure, no roads, no amenities, no services. You're basically on your own unless you stumble upon a member of the Backcountry Division in these parts of the park. The Backcountry employees are responsible for routine patrols, issuing permits, providing assistance, and generally ensuring visitors' safety through the enforcement of park regulations. While it's an 8 to 10 hour shift on paper, backcountry rangers are never really off the clock. The witness described it as the most fatiguing job they had ever had, both mentally and physically. This particular backcountry ranger had been assigned a patrol loop that took him through Yosemite National Park's Hetch Hetch Hetchy region, the same area where it might be recalled from an earlier video. Michael Allen Fishery disappeared 7 years later. Few visitors to make their way to this part of the park as it sits 10 to 20 miles from any road. The first day took the ranger 9 miles deep into the wilderness, past Rancheria Falls. By this point, hikers were few and far between, and by midday nobody else was around. The ranger continued in his solitude through the next day, taking notes, cleaning up the odd firing he happened upon. By around noon, he found himself another 9 miles deep by Payak Creek. It was then that he spotted it, something lying in the middle of the trail ahead. At first, the ranger thought it was just a rock, but as he drew closer, he could see that it was furry and that a crow was pulling off strips of flesh, fearing the worst and aware of Yosemite's reputation for disappearances. The ranger had braced himself to find human remains. Fortunately, it was the head of a deer. He began examining it for details, but the eyes were missing, a favourite first course for scavengers. Nothing on there. But as the ranger looked closer, other things did not seem right to begin with. There weren't any tracks in the trail. In fact, it looked as though the surrounding dirt had been deliberately brushed clean. Moreover, the head was obviously fresh, retaining plenty of flesh and fur, and the blood just barely beginning to coagulate, flipping the grizzly find over with his boot. The ranger could tell that this was no animal attack. The cuts were simply too clean. This had to be the result of a human tool. The ranger was now on high alert. Hunting of any kind was illegal in Yosemite, so he's looking around for somebody else, or even the rest of the carcass, but there was nothing nearby. It was almost as if the deer had been just placed directly in his path, far from the kill site for him to find this. It was weird. The ranger thumbed his radio to report the incident, but immediately felt silly after all. It was just a head, right. Instead, he signaled code number 4. The designation that all was well before taking notes and using his park-issued shovel to bury the head. The ranger continued his patrol, but was sufficiently disturbed. Every sound and dark and bit of underbrush seemed to indicate an invisible threat following his every move. This feeling had just begun to dissipate when, under half-mile, he stopped dead in his tracks. Once more, it was another deer head identically severed, although a bit less fresh. The ranger wasn't particularly excitable. He later claimed to have once lived in a house that was probably haunted, but this suggested an immediate, clear and present danger was at hand with shaking hands. He buries the second head just as he had the first, and at this point, the ranger desperately wanted to return to civilization. But as he studied his options, he realized that there was nothing more that could be done. He was miles from the nearest road, and he wasn't about to cause a fuss by requesting a helicopter evacuation over some deer heads. The only way out was to continue his circuit. Half a mile later, a third head awaited him. It seemed even older than the second, nearly stripped to the bone. Surely this was deliberate, right? I mean, what could it mean? And who could have done this? The ranger had not seen another living soul for miles. He buried the third head, hoping the ordeal was now over, and luckily for the most part it was the ranger had later wrote on his own blog. The last adventurer never have. I felt so uncomfortable in the wilderness as every sound, every movement and everything seemed to be connected to my imminent death. I walked and walked and walked and walked well beyond the sunset. When I finally made camp, I didn't make camp, I found a tree that was well off the trail, one that was next to a rock outcropping. I placed my back to the tree and the rocks and faced outward. I didn't turn on a light. I didn't do anything except sit there until dawn came, watching the forest, wondering about the heads and their meaning. The next day, I put my pack on and continued on my patrol. A day later, I finished my patrol and drove back to the valley and my house. Only then I slept. I filed a report about what I saw, but as far as I know, nothing ever came of it, and the mystery remains to this day. What did these skulls mean, if anything? Was it a psychopath playing with the ranger watching from the bushes? Or was the ranger somehow caught in a temporary time vortex? The deer heads were all spaced a half mile away from each other, and exhibited signs of more and more advanced decay every time he had found them. Could it have been actually the same head each time, perhaps? Over the course of a mile? This unsuspecting backcountry ranger slipped into a time anomaly that allowed him to go into the future. If so, he's lucky to have escaped alive. Otherwise, he might have simply been added to Yosemite's ever-growing list of unexplained disappearances. The Hetch Hetchy region that the ranger was patrolling lies quite close to the Tilton Mountain, a site of numerous odd occurrences, offering alternative explanations for the beheaded deer. One possibility is that the remains were the work of Bigfoot, which is no stranger to the area or Yosemite National Park. More generally, another area with Bigfoot activity seems to be Miguel Meadow, which sits only 3 miles from the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. It was here in the summer of 2004 that a Yosemite National Park worker was turning in for the night when he had heard something running down a nearby hill on 2-4. The young man later told a park co-worker that he actually wasn't afraid of the sound. He had jumped right past fear into resignation, knowing that he was a dead man. The only question that entered his mind was how he would escape his fate, but at the same time he felt that he had to do so. He tried to decide whether he should simply flee his tent or whether or not he should stand his ground and try to frighten away this mysterious intruder. He chose the latter course of action, leaping from his sleeping bag out of the tent and into the night air in one swift motion, but before he even saw what was facing, the park worker let loose a tremendous scream louder than he had ever yelled in his life. He was answered by an even louder roar, so close it was nearly in his face. The hapless victim was standing toe-to-toe with a tall bipedal creature weighing maybe 600. It was covered top to bottom and dark hair. The worker's gambit seemed to pay off as the Bigfoot hurried back up the hill. The moment its own blood-curdling scream had ended in a panic, the worker rushed to a nearby camp where he knew some seasoned forestry veterans were staying despite the wild nature of his tale. They told the young man that they too had seen many odd things over their years in Yosemite, and that in all honesty, nothing seemed to surprise them anymore. One can only wonder if these old rangers had ever heard of the wolf apes, described as a hideous mixture of canine and primate features. The wolf has been reported in and around Yosemite National Park for around a century now. Witnesses say that the beast has the head of a dog or an ape, most often a baboon, which is constantly frothing at the mouth and coughing as though ill the rest of its body, including its human-like feet and hands, sports a layer of grey, mangy hair when it vocalizes. The creature allegedly sounds like a revolting combination of a pig squealing and someone vomiting. Supposedly tales of the wolf ape stretch back into Yosemite's indigenous lore. An apocryphal story claims that Ansel Adams, the legendary photographer who helped shape our image of America's national parks, actually faced down a troop of the creatures while working in Yosemite. Supposedly he sheltered in his tent until the horde moved along. Today, the wolf ape is sometimes referred to as the Watts Valley. Wolf ape, taking its name from the cemetery far to Yosemite's southeast, where it purportedly lurks, sightings of the wolf ape have remained sporadic over the years and are usually poorly sourced and lacking substantive detail. One story claims a wolf ape torn to a single-room schoolhouse near Yosemite, forcing the students to pile their desks together, climb them, and retreat to the raptors as their teacher locked himself inside a closet. The wolf ape simply forced itself into the building, raided the children's lunches, and left. Another account claims that a man of the cloth actually shot and killed a 10 FD long wolf ape. In the 1950s, the preacher deemed the beast one of the Satan's pets, hanging it on the walls of his church as a stark reminder of the evil one's constant presence. Naturally, the animal began to decay after several weeks, forcing the preacher to sell the specimen to a traveling sideshow where it allegedly toured the west coast. The end of this story implies that the wolf carries a curse. The preacher used the money from the sale to fund a new church in San Francisco, but was murdered before he could make the purchase, his body so mangled that it took months to correctly identify him. The wolf ape has appeared in more recent years. Witnesses at Madera County's Bass Lake first thought they were watching a hairy man on all fours. When they spotted it in the mid-1990s, they got a better look at it as it stopped to drink from the lake and came away convinced that whatever it was is certainly not human. The most recent story actually comes from Watts Valley Cemetery. The witness and his uncle were hunting nearby when a wolf, a bluff, charged them out of the bushes. Both the uncle and his nephew said it was 6 effed long, grey-haired, and had a baboon face with human-like eyes. The creature's oft-reported illness was made apparent after it opened its slobbering maw to issue a disgusting coughing sound. The witnesses fled over several fences to cow pastures and whatnot, and the wolf ate in hot pursuit, only slightly hindered after the nephew lobbed his lunch in its direction. The chase terminated in Watts Valley Cemetery, where the witnesses hoped they could hide behind one of the many tombstones. The wolf ape wasn't fooled, however, and perhaps catching their scent rushed in their direction. Their tale takes a humorous, almost anticlimactic turn. At this point, whether through stupidity, inspiration, or desperation, one of the witnesses reached into his pocket and tossed some sticks of cinnamon-flavored chewing gum at the beast. The wolf ape seemed fascinated by the smell, pausing its relentless pursuit to examine the strange projectiles. According to the story, a caretaker for the cemetery arrived in his truck moments later, and all three watched the creature for a few moments before he offered the witnesses a lift back to their car. They left the Watts Valley wolf ape in the rearview mirror. What's interesting to me about the details of the wolf ape is that it closely resembles the details of a gogway, supposedly a more violent and red version of a bigfoot, roughly around 6 to 12 feet tall. They are commonly referred to as many indigenous tribes to be the more dangerous, violent, and aggressive Bigfoot. They're often spotted with having red eyes, a baboon-like face, and if you come across one, know that they will kill you. Fresno, California sits not too far from Yosemite National Park. Over the years, the surrounding area has earned a reputation for some truly remarkable phenomena, from ghosts to Bigfoot to pygpherosaur sightings, and even encounters with gnomes. By far the most iconic cryptid to emerge from this region are the nightcrawlers. They first came to national attention around 2007 after a Fresno family began suspecting trespassers on their property each night. The family dogs would bark, transfixed by something waiting and unseen in the night, and to catch these intruders, their family installed security cameras. Shortly thereafter, they captured something that nobody else could explain. In the video, a short, armless figure steps out of the darkness, a little more than thin white legs apparently bent backwards. There is a suggestion of fabric billowing about the figure, leading many to compare the apparition to a disembodied pair of legs wearing white pants. This and similar recordings of the nightcrawlers have proven controversial over the years. Skeptics and believers alike have spent countless hours poring over these brief video snippets, hoping to discern whether the nightcrawlers are genuine or fake. Everybody who has analysed the footage is left scratching their heads, admitting that if it is fake, it is incredibly sophisticated. This was not the last time that California's nightcrawlers would be caught on video, because in March of 2011, park rangers and Yosemite National Park set up their own cameras, hoping to record trespassers who had been vandalizing the property in the wee hours of the morning instead of teenagers. Partiers, their surveillance system caught 2 nightcrawlers trumping down a paved pathway in the park. One appears uncouth, finally, similar to the shape picked up by the Fresno family, with a slight indication of a bulbous head atop its billowing legs. The other is much shorter, perhaps standing near inches tall. In the years since, the nightcrawlers have been spotted elsewhere in America, like Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and Kentucky, even as far away as Poland, but no one seems to know exactly what they represent. One common claim found online is that Native Americans in and around the Yosemite Valley speak of similar creatures and their own folklore. According to this theory, nightcrawlers are emissaries of peace, helping humankind re-establish our connection to the environment. The nightcrawler beings are swamp dwellers whose long legs have helped them navigate soggy or treacherous terrain since before humans supposedly existed. It's a fun idea, but actual concrete testimony from indigenous informants regarding this legend is hard to find if it exists at all. Some even assert the idea has been flat-out debunked. Even if the nightcrawlers aren't Native American spear beings used, the national park offers no shortage of other things they might represent. Like other states on the West Coast, California is a UFO hotspot. Maybe the night crawlers are extraterrestrials or probes sent by an advanced civilization from another planet. If not aliens, then perhaps they are the Yosemite, the vague killers that the men walk once claimed infested the valley. In some ways, the fact that we cannot definitively say what the night crawlers are emphasizes our difficulty when dealing with the paranormal in general. We can't put names to many of these things, and there is no name for the stranger who called up for Christine, no name for the humanoid that crossed the pathway at Chilnorder Falls, no name or even a face for whatever beheaded deer around Hetch. Hetchy, even the term wolf ape is a poor attempt to capture the essence of whatever stalks Waltz Valley Cemetery. Although we like to believe that we have catalogued everything under the sun, it seems that some things still lurk out there under the cover of darkness, which will never be able to name a few places offer these unspeakable horrors better refuge than America's own protected lands like Yosemite National Park. If you guys enjoyed today's vid, let me know what you think in the comments below, and be sure to go ahead and smack that like button. Also, if you're new to the channel, be sure to go ahead and smack the subscribe button and keep notifications turned on. Remember guys, keep an open mind, I love you all, and I will see you guys in the very next video.